Good afternoon, dear friends. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for a virtual conversation with the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition that couldn't be more timely, focusing on a bipartisan issue that drives so much conversation today around our country. My name is Cramer. I'm CEO of Colliers Commercial Real Estate in Utah, and today we are pleased to host our distinguished and highly experienced U.S. Senator Mitt Romney to explore and discuss the critical relationship between the United States and China and what this means for Utah and our families. Amid a worldwide pandemic, an ever-growing number of global crises, the stakes have truly never been higher for America's global leadership. And we're particularly grateful for Senator Romney's courageous leadership at this challenging time, especially because COVID has been a stark reminder of just how interconnected our national security and prosperity are with the rest of the world. That is why I'm so honored to serve as co-chair for USGLC's State Advisory Committee for Utah, together with our longtime friend, former Congressman Jim Matheson. We thank you all for being with us today and for each of you being an invaluable, involved, and influential member of this vital bipartisan community. Now I'd like to welcome Liz Schrayer, USGLC's talented President and CEO, to begin today's conversation. Liz?
Great. Well, thank you, Lou. Welcome to everybody. It's such an honor to have you, Lou, and Jim Matheson serve as our Utah's advisory chair, co-chair of our advisory committee. What a wonderful opportunity. I'm sorry I'm not in Utah, but to have this important conversation, and so honored that we're going to be able to host Senator Mitt Romney to have this conversation about America's role in the world, to lead a discussion about China and its impact on Utah. Shout out to all of our partners who made today possible, our National Global Impact Project partners, our local partners, our advisory committee members. And as Lou said, what a timely discussion. About 2 weeks ago, USGLC released something that we call our report on reports. Every 4 years, we take an analysis of all the think tanks and policy organizations that put recommendations out to Congress, and in this case, a new administration, on what they see as the global challenges and what we could do as the recommendations. This year, we looked at 120 different think tank and policy review on it. And it won't surprise you that one of the big focus was on China and the competition that dominated these reports. And so we're going to really dig into these conversations, looking at the impact that China is having on our national security, our economic interests, the role of America. And throughout all of these reports are recommendations of how we need to elevate and strengthen our diplomacy, our development programs. And the last thing I would say is something about your host today, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Last year, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. And as part of that, we had a celebration, a virtual celebration, over 10,000 people tuned in. And as part of that, I had a privilege to interview many members of our advisory committee. They're former secretaries of state and defense, people like Condoleezza Rice and Bob Gates and General Paul, General Mattis. One of them was Secretary George Shultz. It was just a few days before his 100th birthday. He since passed away. But I talked to him about these same issues, about what our role was in the world. And he said, it's so obvious that it matters to our interests, that we can't turn inward, that we have to push back against those instincts. And it's simple because it matters to our economic and our security interests. And he specifically shouted out about China, the exact things that Senator Romney talks about all the time. So we're real proud that we're a big tent coalition, that we bring together the business community, the NGO community, that's joining together in this virtual conversation. So today's conversation is going to have two parts to it. The second part, I'm going to come back and talk to some of Senator Romney's constituents to ask him some tough questions that I know he can handle. But the first part is a one-on-one conversation with my dear friend, Representative Peter Roskam. He served in the House of Representatives, representing the Illinois 6th District, and rising to the level of deputy whip in the Congress. Today, he serves as a vice chair of the National Endowment of democracy. And I'm real proud that he serves as a member of the Board of Representatives of the Global Leadership Coalition. He's going to have a chance to interview your wonderful senator, the state of Utah, Senator Mitt Romney. I know all of you are truly, needs no introduction, and you know his commitment to public service. But I also want to make sure you know how extraordinary he's been as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he serves as the ranking member of the Subcommittee of Asia and Pacific, where he has been a real champion on the debate of how we need to position ourselves to compete with China globally. Been an incredible, strong partner and leader about how we use our development and diplomacy tools to promote America's interest in countering China. So, Senator, thank you for being with us today in this important conversation, taking the time to engage with us. Welcome. And Peter, over to you in the first part of our conversation. Welcome to you both.
Terrific. Well, Liz, thanks very much. And Senator, it's a joy to be with you. First, just a point of personal privilege, if I could. Senator, you came in and campaigned for me in 2008 in suburban Chicago. I don't have any expectation that you have an independent recollection of one of thousands of events you've done, but it made a strong impression on me in the graciousness and the humility, and it was not a false humility. There was just a graciousness with which you interacted with me and my family and my supporters. And I want to thank you publicly in front of your constituents for that. So
thank you, Peter. Very kind. Thank you.
Let's set a little scene today. So our goal actually is not just to have an echo chamber conversation where we're just reaffirming back and forth for no purpose things that we all agree on, but it's that this conversation can be a seed that bears fruit. In other words, everybody who is in Utah who hears from you how much of a priority this is for you can be reinforced in their communications around the world and interactions, because as you know better than anybody, this is such a pivotal time in our public life. So let's turn then to this subject of China. There was discussion years ago that the engagement with China would rationalize China. It would be an influence for good. Their presence in the World Trade Organization and these other organizations would be an effort of assimilation, that it would be a restraining influence, and over a period of time, they would join this community of nations. And that was not irrational. It just turned out to be wrong. It didn't work out that way. And so from your position as a member of this pivotal subcommittee, and based on your experience, how do you assess this current relationship that we have that has really moved into sort of sharp-elbowed competition all the way around, and how does it translate into an impact on families in Utah?
Well, that's a big topic. And let me just set a stage a bit, which is, we remember, of course, the days of the Soviet Union. Many of us do. We abhorred what they were doing because of the repression of their own people, because of the limits on freedom that existed in their country, their conquering of their neighbors, their sovereign neighbors, and so forth. And under George Kennan, a strategy was developed, which was basically a containment strategy. Well, the old Soviet Union was powered by their economy, and unfortunately for them, their communist system was such a poor economic model that their economy could not keep up with competition with the West, and they folded their hand. Now we have China, which also represses its people, which limits freedom of the press, which has conquered neighbors, sovereign neighbors, and looks to do so again. And in many respects reminds us of what we saw with the Soviet Union. But unlike the Soviet Union, they were a lot smarter. They got rid of communism and they've adopted a form of capitalism, cowboy capitalism, I call it. And they're using their economic might, which is mighty indeed. It will pass us economically within the next decade, and they will far surpass us in the decades thereafter. So they represent an extraordinary threat in the same way the Soviet Union did, but coming at us in a very different way, not with the guns and warships and nuclear weapons, but instead with a gradual takeover of the other nations of the world, if you will, geopolitically, and then economically continue to dominate the world. So we have to recognize what they are. And I would note that China has developed an extraordinarily comprehensive, highly effective strategy to basically lead to world dominance. It includes their military strategy, which is really quite brilliant. It includes an economic strategy, which is basically to bankrupt one Western industry after another and to take it over through China. It includes a propaganda industry. I mean, I was shocked to learn that in one of our school districts here in Utah, I've only surveyed the one, they said they get hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from the Communist China Party for the school district here in Utah. They are propagandizing across the globe. And then, of course, geopolitically, their Belt and Road Initiative allows them to have both economic tentacles as well as a form of, I'll call it Chinese colonialism. This is a very different competitor than we've ever faced before, and we don't begin to have the kind of strategy we need to put in place to get China to be dissuaded from the course they're on and to instead become a responsible member of the international community, which they are not.
Let's press in on the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is obviously, it's a debt incurring technique to create a sense of obligation and fealty basically to China. I was in Sri Lanka a few years ago. Their port was built by the Chinese. The Sri Lankans defaulted on the debt. And the Chinese said, oh, no problem, we'll just take the port over. So these sort of strategic assets and so forth that are underway. What's your sense in terms of how ambitious the Belt and Road Initiative is, what form it takes, and what observations have you made about just conclusions as to how we can best counter that from your perch on the Foreign Relations Committee?
Yeah, I'd say that the Belt and Road was particularly insightful on their part. It obviously has economic impact because it allows them to have access to markets. It allows them also to get certain critical raw materials that they need to power their economy. So it has economic potential. Number two, it has extraordinary resource for the military, which of the 7 busiest ports or areas of shipping in the world, they have ports now in 6 of them. So they've militarily, strategically, they're in a very strong position. And then geopolitically, by extending loans to some of these countries that are very anxious to have development, they now have a relationship with these governments, which in many cases is very friendly. So it's a really comprehensive form of colonialism, which is designed to serve them well. They're spending, as you know, roughly $1 trillion to do this. And we, of course, in the United States are thinking about whether we're willing to spend $1 trillion on our own infrastructure. Right. The idea that we'd spend $1 trillion on someone else's, there's no way we do that. So we're simply not going to be able to compete with their ambition to establish Belt and Road. We do have a program called the Build Program, which provides some development capital, but recognize the businesses of the West, whether ours or Germany's or Japan's and so forth, these are entities that try and do what's in their own interest for their shareholders and their employees and their customers. They don't think about putting a business or a facility or a port someplace that isn't going to pay a return. But the Chinese are not looking for a return economically. They're looking for these long-term geopolitical and economic and military implications. And we as a country are just not going to be able to stand up to that. In my view, the most effective way we can deal with the Belt and Road is through communication, if you will, telling the truth. I don't want to call it propaganda, but it's truth sharing about what China is going to do to you, showing them the horror stories, the nations of the world, the horror stories that are happening elsewhere, letting them see what's happening in Hong Kong, letting the people of the world know what's happening to the Uyghur people inside China, looking at Tibet, looking at how frightened the people are in Tibet, in Taiwan. Let the world understand what it is that's coming, that this is a great Chinese octopus, if you will. It is a modern day colonial power with all of the downsides that colonialism has had in the world. That's exactly what we're seeing again. And I know there will be autocrats who they won't really care. As long as they're getting money and bribes and development, they'll be happy with China. But we have to go beyond the politicians and the leaders of these various countries and go to the people of the world and communicate what China is actually doing. This is in my view, and it's beginning to happen in a place like Myanmar or Burma. The Chinese have built factories there that are very important for the economics of China. And the Chinese, with the demonstrations going on, the violence going on in Burma, and the military having taken over the coup, the people there are in the streets and angry. Well, China has contacted the military and said, please protect our factories. And the people of Myanmar now see the Chinese in a true light. This is the kind of communication we're going to have to share with the world. And you know, I don't have a comprehensive strategy to make all of this go away and to stop China in its tracks. But I know that we're not going to be able to compete putting out $1 trillion. We're just not going to do that. We care for our seniors. They don't. We have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They don't. We spend money providing for our people. They don't. They say, hey, people, you're on your own. They've got almost 200 million people who live on roughly $1 a day. That would be inexcusable here in this country, but they're using their resources to foster their geopolitical aims, their aims to become the power of the planet, just like the old Soviet Union did. So in my opinion, it's communication and getting the truth out about China, which will help us, I believe, in the long term combating their authoritarian effort.
As you were discussing that effort to reach out, it brought to memory a conversation I had in Liberia with one of their leaders, and it was one of the, my memory is it was maybe the finance minister at the time, and I was a little bit judgmental, and then I came in and said something like, I sure hope you're not taking, you know, support from China, a little bit of an edge to that question. And he basically looked at me, and it was like, he didn't say it this way, but he was saying, what are you talking about, man? Look around. You know, what do you expect me to do? And it was that level of frustration with him that was just palpable. Let's transition. You mentioned the people of the world, and there's a people group that you mentioned a minute ago, Senator, that's under incredible pressure. And these are the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province. There's been a lot of activity on Capitol Hill over the past couple of years in a season when there hasn't been much agreement on anything. There does sense, you know, my sense is that there is some bipartisan agreement here, holding China, you know, Foreign Corporations Accountable Act and so forth. What's your view on sort of where this stands and how the Uyghur question is interacting, and particularly our responsibility that we know from a historical point of view is to stand up for the oppressed and to not be complicit in those things. So how would you kind of quarterback that or navigate that right now?
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Peter, and that is the way we win long term against a competitor which will ultimately have a bigger economy than ours and someday a bigger military than ours. How do we win long term in this century? And it is only by having the people of the world clamor for freedom and insist that they not be oppressed and dominated by the Chinese. And so we need the people of the world to understand what's happening in China, how they treat minorities in China. So the Uyghur people are people, roughly 1 million people who live inside China. They are ethnically not Chinese. They are a different ethnic group altogether. They look sort of Eastern European. They tend to be Islamic in their religious heritage. And they're a industrious, very capable people. The Chinese have decided that they're going to basically commit genocide on the Uyghur people. And so they take the men and put them in work camps. They place Han Chinese in the homes where the men came from and have them impregnate the Uyghur women so that the children would become partially Chinese ethnically. They, by virtue of these practices, are intending to extinguish the culture, the language, and even the race of the Uyghur people. It's an extraordinary thing happening in this day and age, and the world doesn't see it. They keep the world away. If people want to see what's going on with the Uyghurs, the Chinese will show them a little show facility to try and make it look like something that it's not. But we have hundreds of thousands of people in concentration camps and in work camps. And so one part of what we need to do is to make sure that this is known by the world and that this gets the attention that the world needs to recognize. And then secondly, I think you're right, which is we put pressure on those companies that are importing goods where forced labor by Uyghur men and women is being used to artificially lower the cost of goods and then send these goods into the United States and other Western markets. We need to make sure that doesn't happen and that we put a very substantial boycott on products coming from those places. Of course, it's hard to identify. The Chinese move, it's like a shell game. They move things around so that you can't tell where things are coming from, but you do your very best. And this, I point this out that this is not something which the United States of America alone will be able to do and change the attitudes and the practices of the Chinese. And when I say the Chinese, I'm talking about the Communist Chinese Party. This is something which can only be effectively carried out if it is done by all the free nations of the earth. And many other nations, by the way, that aren't even free, but that live by the trade rules that the rest of us live by. We have to all come together. And I think President Biden is intent on creating a summit of all these nations to come together and say, what are the rules of the road? How must you treat your people? How must you deal with others that you're trading with? And if China, you're not willing to live by those rules, then we will not permit you to have free access to our markets. And that, I think, will, if you will, catch the attention of the Chinese and hopefully dissuade them from the course they're on. But what you're seeing with the Uyghurs is an example the world needs to see, because it's coming to other theaters in the Pacific. If we don't stand up for the people of Hong Kong and the Uyghurs, why, you can bet they're looking at the Taiwanese, and after the Taiwanese, they'll be looking at the next place, and one after the other will ultimately be subject to the same kind of outrage we're seeing in China today.
Senator, where do you see our allies playing a role here? We saw the Trump administration being pretty rough to our allies, and a lot of those relationships were frayed. It seems like the Biden administration has an opportunity to win, just sort of by comparison, by winning the expectations game, that is increasing communication and no public shaming and those types of things. Where do you see our allies, particularly those that are close, in close proximity, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Australians? What role do they have in the Pacific, and how would you propose that we interact with them moving forward?
Well, I think they have a very clear-eyed view of what China is doing. And as a result, the Quad that's come together is developing a series of economic strategies and military strategies to coordinate their efforts. That's a very, very good thing. And we want to encourage that, participate in that if they would like us to. We want to bring other nations of the region together to better understand what China is doing, and have them aware of what kind of risk they're taking if they bring the Chinese into their country with loans and development projects, and to make sure that if a country is thinking about taking on Chinese money, call in some advisors from other places to give advice as to how to structure the deals to make sure they don't find themselves in a subservient position. And I think you hit the nail on the head. The only way we're going to be successful in diverting China from the course they're on is by linking arms and linking strategies with other nations of the world, our friends and allies. Those are most importantly in the region where people really understand what it means. The Australians, for instance, understood that just being critical of how the Chinese dealt with the coronavirus has meant, if you will, oppression from the Chinese of their entire country. It's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. So people are waking up to what it means. And I think it's harder for the Europeans to become as concerned about China as those in the Pacific are, because they're after all looking at the Russians, and they're concerned about what the Russians are doing. They got enough on their plate there, but we need to have them more involved and recognize these are two heads of the same beast, the authoritarian beast, if you will, trying to share authoritarianism in the world. China and Russia are not the same entity by any means, but they have a similar geopolitical philosophy and political and economic philosophy. And so I think coordinating with the Europeans is critical. But let me note something else, and that is we have friends and China doesn't. But over time, people decide who to be friendly with out of their self-interest. And if people of the world or the region begin to feel that China is going to dominate the trading lanes, and China is the economic power in the area, and China is the geopolitical dominant and military dominant player in the area, those people are going to begin to be friendly with China out of self-preservation. And so, yes, we have friends all over the world, and we continue to and will for a long time. But don't forget, as China gets stronger and stronger, and is more assertive and aggressive with their military in space, in the seas, and elsewhere, they're going to find countries that become more friendly. And you're already seeing that in the Pacific. Some of the islands of the Pacific, as well as, the Philippines, for instance, cozying up more to China. So recognize that we need to strike while the iron's hot, so to speak. We need to strike while we have all these friends and while we have this awareness.
Senator, our time is short. Quick question. You've got the best insight on this Olympics question, probably than anybody else, because you ran the Olympic Committee for Salt Lake City. What's your view on how we should be approaching the Olympics in China? Should we pull back and break the relationship and boycott? Should we lean in and use that influence to somehow bring attention to things? What's your view?
Well, I would hate to tell our athletes you can't compete in the Olympics. And the reason for that is I learned something about the extraordinary sacrifice these athletes in the United States have made, typically their entire lives, and oftentimes their entire family sacrifices to help a young person become an Olympian. And to say to them, sorry, you can't go to the Olympics, would just be heartbreaking. And many people think, well, let them come back 4 years later. Well, their body is not in the same shape it was. They peak, they train to be ready for the Olympics. So telling them they can't compete, that in my opinion would be a really high price to pay for those athletes. And we'd be asking them to sacrifice for the entire country. I would rather boycott the Chinese Olympics diplomatically and economically. So don't send a group of high visibility American diplomats. Perhaps send some Chinese dissidents and some minorities and some others to make a statement. Economically, ask companies not to buy sponsorships that support the Chinese games, and not to send big cadres of spectators, and perhaps a spectator boycott as well. We don't send people over there. We watch on TV to watch and cheer our athletes. But that's the way I'd go. I will note that one thing that's critical, and that is I want to make sure that we are absolutely certain that our athletes are not going to get held in China after the games are over. That if some athlete says something critical about China, that the Chinese then don't use this obscure law they have about incarcerating anybody who's critical of the Chinese Communist Party. I want to make sure there's an absolute ironclad guarantee that no American athlete, spectator, a coach, and so forth will be held in China once those games are over. That for me would be make or break as well.
Well, Senator, you've been exonerated by history. That is, I remember watching the debate in 2012 when you were told basically in a condescending fashion that the 80s wanted their foreign policy back. And you were right about Russia at the time, you're right about China today. And we're really grateful for your time and your insight. So thanks for the conversation. And Liz, back to you.
Well, thank you, Representative Roskam. What a fabulous beginning to the conversation. We're going to go from the geopolitical, keeping on China, but talking about how China impacts Utah. Senator, I'm going to introduce some of your constituents who want to continue the conversation and make that local connection. So we have some members from our USGLC Utah Advisory Committee, as I said, to stump the senator, but I can tell there is no stumping Senator Romney. So first up, we have about 25 minutes left, and I'm going to start with two. Felicia Maxwell Barrett, Executive Director of Utah's Council for Citizen Diplomacy, and Doug Jackson, President and CEO of Charity Vision. Felicia, why don't we take both questions, and then Senator will let you respond. Felicia, you're up first.
Right. Thank you, Senator Romney. As the Executive Director of Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy, first of all, thank you so much for connecting Utah to the world and the world to Utah. As a nonprofit, our mission is to promote respect and understanding between the people of Utah and other nations. And you mentioned that the solution is to involve the people and get them to be part of the conversation and to be transparent. Well, our guiding principle is citizen diplomacy. So that's the understanding that we all play a role in helping shape U.S. foreign relations, and we do it as simply as one handshake at a time. Although it seems like in the news, diplomacy has been a powerful tool, one vaccine at a time. On that note, China and Russia have had millions of COVID vaccines spread throughout the world. Well, it seems like the US has fallen behind as far as its vaccine diplomacy goes. And research has shown that when we empower and we support other countries that are developing their economy, when they fall behind, it also impacts our economy as well. Could you share just a little bit of thoughts behind U.S. vaccines diplomacy and how we can increase the COVID vaccines that are being shared throughout the world?
Great. So
Thanks. Okay.
Doug's question first, and then we'll hear from you. And Doug. Wait, you're on mute. We can't hear you. Doug, we can't hear you. Try again.
I should be okay.
There we go. Now we're good.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Mitt, as you know, I'm CEO of Charity Vision, a nonprofit that empowers medical communities around the world. And we've had the pleasure of traveling internationally into a variety of countries. I think we've been to Indonesia, Peru, India, Philippines, everywhere we've gone. Our work has created strong bonds between the local communities and the United States. And my question, and you've already hit it so well, but I'll state it, it was maybe along the lines of the Belt and Road policies of China, but as I traveled the developing world, I see that China is outplaying us on the diplomatic front. China is buying up mines, farms, factories, as you said. They put a big, huge, it's amazing to me because they put a big, huge Chinese flag out front, and and everybody knows they're Chinese, and they employ some of the locals. And it seems like the locals love it, and they feel very positively towards China, how they've come and created these jobs, and they don't see it for what it really is. And you've already addressed that, and just with that in mind, and I think the American people, we can do it so much better. And I wanted to know if you're concerned about that, this opportunity, lost opportunity to be the country that so many people look towards as the example and to admire and to look to for real assistance, and if we should be doing something more. You've hit on maybe what's holding us back. And so I might rephrase my question and say, you know, the American people, we're great, we're givers, we're doers. And there's NGOs and humanitarian organizations throughout the country that are willing to go in and do some of this work maybe the US government's not willing to do. So is there a role the US government can play in assisting those groups like Charity Vision to be even bigger and better and do more?
Thank you.
US economy, or Congress can't pull that and write that check. Maybe through helping some of us organizations in the United States, maybe they can offset that.
Great, thank you. Senator.
Thank you. I'll note for those that wondered, when Doug was describing those places that he visited, I visited those places with him along with my family. So we had worked together there. First, the question with regards to the vaccine. The Chinese and the Russians are saying, hey, look, our people are going to have to wait. We're going to have deaths and hospitalizations in our country because we're going to use these vaccines to go to other places because of our geopolitical aims. That tells you how they prioritize their interests, which is geopolitical dominance and supplanting the United States and replacing freedom with authoritarianism. And they're willing to let their own people die in some cases. It's a choice that you make. In this country, we will vaccine our own people first. That's a choice that we're going to make. We feel a responsibility to the people of the United States who pay the taxes and expect us to care to the extent we can. At the same time, it's incumbent on us, I believe, to do everything in our power to get vaccine throughout the world. One, because of a humanitarian desire, we have to help our fellow brothers and sisters, if you will. But secondly, for the very simple reason that this COVID virus is going to continue to mutate. And if there are places in the world where it's not been stamped out, mutations are going to come to this country, which will reinfect us because we will not have been able to have prevented them with the vaccine. So, we have an interest in seeing the world vaccinated. And I would suggest that we should make a very aggressive effort to establish manufacturing sites of the vaccine through licensing agreements with other pharmaceutical companies and other places of the world. Not shipping product, if you will, from Michigan today, from the Pfizer facility in Michigan, but instead establishing licensed facilities elsewhere. And so we can get vaccine in these countries, our vaccines from Moderna, from Pfizer, from Johnson & Johnson. That I think should be our high priority there. And then as Doug Jackson raised with regards to our NGOs, we can invest through the Build Act and help compete to a certain degree, but we're far behind what China's doing financially. But we can have many of the humanitarian organizations and can encourage them to participate and to, if you will, show the flag, to let people in the world know that this is coming from the United States of America and from contributions of American people. I mean, Charity Vision gets its support from the people of America. And I think it's important for you guys in the NGO world to fly the American flag or the German flag or the French flag, but some flags to let people know that this is coming from people who share your values. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both. Our next two friends from Utah are Jen Nelson, who is from Innovation Partnerships, Dairy West, and Kent Davis, who is one of our veterans for Smart Power, one of our 30,000 veterans from across the country, and serves as the Deputy District Attorney at Salt Lake. So Jen, why don't you go first and then Kent?
Sure, thanks for having me. Senator Romney, what a pleasure to be here and what a great conversation thus far. I represent Dairy West. We represent dairymen and dairy processors alike across the region of Utah and Idaho. And as you're familiar, Utah is very much an ag state. We help feed the world. And that's something our dairymen are extremely proud of and very passionate about. In fact, Utah exported upwards of 430 million of ag products in 2018. So as America's international affairs programs are feeding the world, China is also stepping up their game with hundreds of Chinese ag specialists working hard to expand those partnerships. Can you talk to us a little bit about why it's important for us to double down on our investments in tackling global hunger and to support our partners overseas, as well as the economy here at home?
Great, and we are missing Kent Davis, so we got to get Kent on screen for you, Senator.
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
There we go. Okay, now we have Kent. All yours.
Good afternoon, Senator. I'm a Deputy District Attorney for Salt Lake County. I'm also a proud veteran of the United States Army. In recent years, we've seen the United States clash with China on a number of military concerns, including disputed waters in the South China Sea and Taiwan. My question is, how can our military, alongside our diplomatic and development agencies, continue to mitigate these conflicts with China in order to counter Chinese aggression?
Well, hunger and military, neither are easy.
Yeah, neither are easy. And I would say in both cases, I'll just start off with an umbrella comment, and that is that we have to work on a strategic basis, meaning we have to have a grand strategy that encompasses everything from our economy, our food, our military, our geopolitical ambitions, the work at the UN. I mean, every element, just like they do. China has that. And we tend to look at areas one by one and try and figure out what's the right thing to do in one area or another, but haven't thought about how this all fits together. And one of the things that Republicans and Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee are doing is saying, hey, let's come together and develop a strategy designed to get China to finally play by the rules and to be dissuaded from the course that they're on. So that hasn't been done yet. So with that as an overview, I'll give you some thoughts about the two topics that you raised. One, we very much want to be able to sell our goods and services to China, and we'll look to improve our trade relations and to provide to them things which they desperately need. And we are able to grow and provide agriculture products in a way that China cannot. They rely on the rest of the world for agriculture and for energy. And we are an energy producer. We actually produce as much energy as we need and then some. And so we will be able to export things like natural gas and coal to China. We also want to be able to export agriculture products. And part of the job of our government, our Commerce Department and Agriculture Department, is to foster the trade that we have with China and other nations. So I'm happy to sell them things, right? So I encourage you to continue to pursue that avenue. I make sure that we sell them things we're not subsidizing, because I'd hate to be, if you will, having the American taxpayer subsidize something which then goes there. That's just like giving money from the U.S. To China. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. With regards to military, there's no question that the following the World War, the Second World War, the United States of America said to the world, we're going to make sure we have freedom of navigation, freedom in the skies, and freedom in the seas, and freedom in space. And our military has provided that. We don't insist that people, don't go through the Panama Canal without, and have to pay us a toll to do so. We don't prevent various ships from going through the Panama Canal, even though it's in our region. And so it's important for us to make sure that if you will, the South China Sea is not taken over and dominated by China in such a way that there's not free navigation through that area. And likewise, the East China Sea. That means that we need to have American naval presence in that region. And I would make sure that we continue to have our presence there. I think we were mistaken not to literally take out the Chinese bases that were established, military bases that were established at the South China Sea on the islands there. I think we should have moved aggressively as they began that construction to let them know that was not going to be allowed. It was inconsistent with agreements and inconsistent with the principle of the freedom of the seas. So I think we have to be assertive. We're not going to go to war with China. That obviously would be absurd. Neither party wants that, but we have to make sure that we continue to defend the rights of all nations to space, to the seas, and to the air.
Senator, we have time for just two more comments from your constituents. Let me introduce Shadman Bashir, who is the Director of International Students at Dixie State University. And I'm going to bring back Lou Cramer, who's going to get the last question from your constituents. Shadman, you're up.
Thank you very much, Congressman, Senator, sorry. My name is Shadman Bashir. I'm the Director of the International Student Services and Advisor at the Global Chamber in sunny Southern Utah. I always mention sunny Southern Utah in St. George. The question that I have, or the comment that I have is my China connections are better than your China connections. That's what I come across, people reaching out to us, people trying to sell me their China connections because that's where we can get most of our students. I mean, China is number one, was number one in the highest number of students coming to Utah and other regions as well. Utah has more than 8,000 students from China. So that's education and cultural exchanges. So that makes it very tough for the local economies to deal with because that is the bulk of the money that's coming in. How do we handle that? What do we do about that? What's your input on post-COVID cultural and educational exchanges? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lou, you're on mute. Take yourself off mute.
You think I could figure this out by now. Senator, thank you. That's been a brilliant tour of the horizon, and we applaud your clear thinking and leadership on this. We need to listen to more of these kind of conversations. And as you know, Utah is one of the most globally engaged states in America. Many of us have served overseas, whether in the military, on a church opportunity. Our World Trade Center Utah, led by Miles Hansen, has been booming. Our international exports are doing very well, and thank you for your leadership in allowing all those things to go forward. Our question is now that with all of this global challenges that are really posed by the Chinese Communist Party, not by the Chinese themselves, how do we ensure that our rhetoric doesn't turn into negativity toward Asian Americans generally, whom I adore? I spent 3 years in Japan. I spent a lot of business time over there, as many of us have. What can we do that we keep this anti-Asian violence from getting out of hand? So again, thank you again.
Thank you, Lou. Let me start with that question, which is I think it's incumbent on the president and leaders of all kinds to make it very clear that we welcome Asians as legal immigrants. We certainly welcome Asian Americans. If you look at the businesses that have been started in the last 10 years that employ millions of Americans, and you say, who started those businesses? The Asian Americans are responsible for well more than their fair share of those businesses. As a matter of fact, legal immigrants are responsible for well more than their fair share. People who come here from foreign places seeking liberty often come with ideas to start businesses, and those businesses employ Americans and raise wages here. So we need to make it very clear. I mean, I would welcome an influx of people from Asian nations to come to our country because I know they would create a stronger economy for us. It's just the reality. America is going to shrink unless we have some legal immigration, and legal immigration among Asian Americans, a people that are devoted to family and to hard work and education and STEM subjects, these are the kind of people that are are good in terms of helping our economy. And so we welcome immigrants from all places, but let's not in any way denigrate the capability and the contribution of people of Asian descent. To the topic of students, look, I think we welcome students coming here from China as well as other Asian nations. But as you speak, particularly with regards to China, I would note that I think it's important that we take a very careful look about those who come in graduate programs, particularly graduate programs where they may be seeking to gain technology to take back to their country and to use against us. So I would be very, very reluctant to bring in students from China that I thought were here to steal technology. That's not going to be the case at Dixie State University or Southern Utah University or many other universities, but I'd be concerned about some of those top graduate programs. I'd also note that the so-called Confucius Institutes have been designated by our intelligence committees and our intelligence community as places where the Chinese Communist Party has established spies to spy on Chinese students and to see if the students here are saying or doing anything that might suggest that they're becoming enamored with America. I think it's very important that we get these Confucius Institutes out of our campuses. We've encouraged every campus in America to get rid of them, and they're in high schools too. Look, the Chinese they're out there promoting themselves in a way which is understandable, but unacceptable. And so welcome. I'm delighted to bring in Chinese students. Hopefully that cultural exchange will allow these Chinese students to recognize that America is very different than they've been taught at home. And hopefully we'll have some friends to communicate to the Chinese people ultimately that the course of America is the right course for any people seeking happiness and freedom.
Senator, what a tour de force of this incredible complex topic. And thank you to our Utah citizens for engaging. And I think we could go on and on and on. Perhaps I could ask one last follow-up question for our conversation. The challenges that we've been talking about of China and what they pose to us are extraordinary. And I appreciate, I think we all do, that you keep bringing back, we don't have a strategy, and that we need a strategy to address these very complex issues. And the role of diplomacy and development, the centerpiece of what USGLC is all about, is critical to this. If we came back a year from now, 2 years from now, and we're honored enough to have continue this conversation with you, what would success look like as we think about the US-China relationship, US in the world to combat the competition with China? What does that look like if all the vision that you have, that you talked about with us the last 50 minutes, we could make sure happen?
Well, number one would be a meeting, perhaps a summit, perhaps smaller regional meetings, but meetings of nations that play by the rules. Hopefully free nations and democracies, but some other nations as well that play by the rules, where we come together and lay out a series of economic principles that we will insist nations follow in order to have access to our markets. And if they don't follow those rules, why, they're going to get hit with very high tariffs if they want to bring their products into our respective markets. Or in some cases, we'll say, we're not going to buy your products. We're not going to bring in products that have a military application or national security implications. We're not going to bring them into our countries if you don't play by the rules. So one, a summit, if you will, of those nations, a working group among those nations to decide what the rules ought to be. Hopefully, we even establish some of those rules and what the penalties are for not following those rules. That in my opinion, is step one, and perhaps the most important, because what put the Soviet Union out of business was their economic distress, and China's strength is derived in part because of their economic vitality, and making sure they play by the rules is one way to bring them down to earth in terms of that sources of those funds. So that for me would be most critical. And then I'd also note that, success would also be seeing a return to the human rights we would expect for the Hong Kong people and the people of the Uyghur people. I think it's unlikely that China will bend to that. but communicating that to other nations of the world and having nations understand what's going on in China and what's at stake is something which I think would be a great accomplishment if we could make sure that happens.
Senator, this has been an extraordinary conversation. Thank you for enlightening us. Thank you for allowing us to engage with you. We look forward to convening more of these conversations. And on behalf of everybody who's participated, thank you for your leadership, most of all. I know you have to run. We're going to take 2 last minutes for my colleague, Luke Wentz, the Deputy National Outreach Director, to close our program. But on behalf of all of us, if we could rise up and give you a standing ovation, we would. But I'm doing it for everybody, the thousands of people watching either on Facebook or through our platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Well, thank you, Liz. And first, Senator, I want to thank you for your incredible leadership in the United States Senate and for joining us here for this really important discussion, as well as thanking Congressman Roskam, our Utah Advisory Committee leaders who joined us, and of course, Liz for moderating the conversation today. My name is Luke Wentz. I'm the Deputy National Outreach Director of the Western Region for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition here. And I'm so glad to have been part of this conversation. There's a lot of great ideas, but truly, I hope the conversation doesn't stop here. I want to challenge each of you to carry on this conversation with your networks and in your communities, with your family and your friends, and please share those stories with us. We want to hear from you. And I want to encourage all of you to take some time exploring our report on reports that Liz mentioned earlier today that highlights a bipartisan roadmap for American leadership on some of today's most pressing global challenges. Feel free to download that full report at usglc.org and share those findings with your community, your family, your friends, etc. And if you have a platform on social media, please use it there too. We'd love to hear from you. Don't let that red leave meeting button be the end of it today, and just continue this conversation. Lastly, Senator, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you all for joining us, and look forward to speaking with you all soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.